This session will discuss the cooperation in energy and environment and the potential between the two countries in new energy and in combating the climate change. I have with me two distinguished women and speakers, Dr. Fatima Al-Shamsi, Professor of Economy, and she held many positions. I cannot say it now. You can go to her CV and check what she did. Well-known economist in UAE, and Dr. Cinzia. I spell it good.
Very good.
Okay.
Excellent.
Bianco, a visiting fellow in the European Council on Foreign Relations. I'll give each of you 15 minutes. That's enough?
Yeah.
Okay. And then we'll open for the discussion. Okay. I'll start with our guest, Cinzia, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ibtisam. Once again, it's been a very interesting morning, and I'm sure it will be also the afternoon. And thank you so much for hosting us. So, I, at the European Council on Foreign Relations, I focus on relations between Europe and the Gulf, both at the level of the European Union and individual governments, and on different domains. And I think it says a lot that we were asked, and I was asked specifically from the European side, to work on energy and climate issues already a year and 2 months ago. This tells you that Europe was already looking towards the Gulf, and in particular the Gulf monarchies, with the intent of having a comprehensive energy and climate partnership before Russia invaded Ukraine. Of course, once Russia invaded Ukraine, the emphasis was not only on energy and climate, but also on energy security on its own, while keeping in mind the climate objectives. And I will explain a little bit more what that means. But I think, let me start by saying I have heard you when you say that we Europeans should start to talk more considering your own interests, your own perspectives, and your own priorities. And I think this is a very healthy idea, and I think, definitely one that is shared by me personally, and it's increasingly shared, I think, at a wider level in Europe. So I will also talk a little bit through the prism of joint and common interests. Let me start by saying that the one sentence. Today we will export the last barrel of oil. It's a day that we will celebrate. This is not a quote from some, leading German politician from the Green Party. It's a quote from Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed himself. He said, the UAE will celebrate the day that we export our last barrel of oil. And I think, why did he say that? It's because the Emirati leadership already has in mind a strategy for what the world will look like after oil. There is an acknowledgement that oil, the days of oil, are finite. There will be an expiry date. And that this is a good thing for the environment, that there is an expiry date. And for the oil-producing countries, that does not mean necessarily an economic shock if they have a successful strategy in place. And I think this is the case for the UAE. The UAE is a country that is always looking decades ahead. That is always the front runner and forerunner for the future and how the future looks like, especially at the level of the region. So it's a leader in the sense that, you know, starts breaking barriers and implementing changes well ahead of the others and shows the way to the others in the region. So it is, I think, for this reason that it's particularly important to talk about the energy transition with the UAE from a European point of view. And of course, I mean, Germany has recognized that, I think, quite clearly because, as has been mentioned before, Germany does have a specific strategic agreement on renewable energy and the energy transition with the UAE. It's been already quite successful in terms of coordination and communication at the technical level. Things like, you know, technology transfer. Things like how should these infrastructures to make the green energy business sustainable and productive and lucrative, how do these structures look like? And you know, there's been I think a quite successful technical conversation going on, but also a commercial and strategic conversation. For example, the German Foreign Ministry has a specific hydrogen diplomacy office. And in the Gulf, there are two antennas or physical offices based. One is in Riyadh, and the other one is in the UAE, based out of the AHK. So there is a recognition that is quite clear in Germany and has been for 2 years that the UAE is a strategic interlocutor, in particular on the future of energy, renewable energy, which specifically means green hydrogen and electricity. And there are things that are happening already. What I think has happened this month when the European Union released the joint communication on a strategic partnership with the Gulf, is that these interesting activities and ideas that Germany is leading at the European level have been embraced to a large extent by Brussels, which means by the other 26 governments. And in that, again, from a UAE perspective, Germany is a strategic interlocutor on green hydrogen, the future of energy. And let me say, I think, you know, again, of course, you know, there is a common comment, which is that green hydrogen is very futuristic and there are still a few limitations. And of course, I take that argument. I do think that this country, because it's forward-looking, because it's future-oriented, is an easier place to say, yes, there are limitations, but there is also high-level scientific research going into that energy source that is showing already results. And so if you look a little bit towards beyond the obstacles and you believe in science, there is definitely a huge potential to overcome all of those limitations. So just to give you one small example, in the United Kingdom, there's already today, active already, a pilot project to use green hydrogen to heat homes. So imagine if that pilot project is successful, imagine what it means. And you can use that very clean fuel to heat homes. Now, let me move to also say why it would be interesting, I think, from a UAE perspective. The first of all is, of course, to remain a strategic energy exporter beyond oil. But the second one is also an interesting point about diversification. Of course, you know, there's a lot of talk about we need to diversify partnerships in the UAE and in other Gulf monarchies, and it's a very important point. But if you look at fossil fuels, today over 90% of UAE oil goes to Asia, not all to China, but to Asia. I think it's over all 4 countries, mostly. And 90% of UAE LNG also goes to Asia. So if we're really talking about diversification, and I think this is also in the mindset of the UAE leadership, augmenting, strengthening, upgrading your energy partnership with Europe also works well for diversification purposes. And the third point is, of course, you know, that doesn't, that would not be, and that nobody wants, as our speaker said before, to look at the Gulf as Europe's gas station. That will never, absolutely never happen, especially if you look already at the way that the policies are being framed. And this is where we get to the environment part. In the strategy, in the EU strategy, but also in the German documents, there is always the offer of a much more comprehensive partnership that goes beyond renewables, electricity, or fossil fuels. It thinks about the environmental impact of energy. And that ranges from air pollution, for example, to water security. One of the ideas that we are working on, for example, is to tie into this energy partnership the idea of really strengthening the technology transfer, the transfer of technologies specifically for water desalination purposes. The GCC countries, all of them, are the countries in the world desalinating the largest volume of water. And yet, today they still depend on technology that is imported, mostly from Europe, but also slightly from Japan and the United States. So I think if we look at comprehensively energy and environment as one file where we can talk about the different issues in a moderate way, there is a lot of space to think about technology transfer specifically for those aspects where European added value could be to the benefit of sustainability. And so, for example, a preferential trade agreement on green technology, which would also cover water desalination technology. And this is the kind of, I think, mindset that there is very much at this time in Brussels. That is, you know, just very comprehensively beyond the fact of importing energy from the Gulf. And as part of that, the European Union has, you know, already offered that the Global Gateway instrument, which is the EU's equivalent to China Belt and Road Initiative, will feature a lot of infrastructural investments and space for co-investments with the Gulf monarchies. So European investment into high-tech green technology in the Gulf and joint European Gulf investment in third areas such as specifically the Mediterranean. In fact, the last point I want to make is on the Mediterranean. This is, you know, it's, I think it was particularly good that the Europeans made it very clear that they will diversify away from their Russian dependency. Yesterday, they agreed on a sixth package of sanctions against Russia, which basically cover 90% of Russian exports towards Europe, which as of the next couple of days, will be sanctioned. And, but we also have to think about the implications of that embargo. Some of that implications are that, of course, Europeans will have to diversify their sources, and they are looking at doing that while still trying to respect the environment. So the priorities are to diversify import of fossil fuels, but also to accelerate massively on green energy. And that's why I'm happy that they put finally in Brussels a number on how much green hydrogen they want to import in Europe, and that number is 10 million tons by 2030. Now, 2030 is much sooner than we were initially thinking. And that, I think, is a massive opportunity for the countries like the UAE and Saudi Arabia, who are far ahead of the others in terms of being able to actually produce tons of green hydrogen. However, they also, the European Union also made it very clear that they will continue to look at the Mediterranean as a strategic arena. And so what they propose is, in the joint communication, is yes, to have a potentially a green hydrogen partnership with the GCC, but also a partnership that looks at joint work in the wider region. And this, I think, works very well with what we have heard this morning, that we should look at the UAE as a leading player at the regional level, not only exclusively as the UAE, but also as part of the regional coalitions. And I think we are going to see something very interesting in that sense, because, for example, Masdar, the UAE company, is the most important player in Egypt for green hydrogen. So there again, there is a massive opportunity for partnership. So I want to close now, because I don't want to... I still have 4 minutes, okay. So I'll make a final, thank you so much. So I'll make a final concluding point in these 4 minutes I have. Which I think is, we are now talking about energy in a different way than we were before the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And I understand that, you know, from a regional perspective, you might think that, you know, you're getting very contrasting signals from Europe. On one hand, they're telling you, you know, fossil fuels increase pollution and kill the environment. On the other hand, they're telling you, help us by producing more because we need to lower the prices. Otherwise, that's invalidating for the sanctions we're putting on Russia. Then they're also telling you, but please go ahead with the green energy, because we still want to have a very specific cutoff date for fossil fuels and switch to green. And I understand it's quite a lot to take, but I don't think that these many things are in a contradictions. Some of these contradictions have already, for example, been addressed specifically by Germany in its conversations with Qatar on LNG. And what the German side is trying to tell the Qatari side is, we understand that you need a longer time frame instead of a short-term commercial agreement. So why don't we do a comprehensive agreement that looks at fossil fuel in the short term, clean energy in the longer term, and then sort of attaches that together with different other environmental and technological issues that can be beneficial for both sides in the future and for a longer time. And I think, you know, that will be a very interesting testing opportunity to see if you can find a compromise between the short term and the long term, because I believe that there is one. The sense is that, you know, Germany as an individual country will lead this conversation at the European Union level, but the opportunity here is very much larger even than Germany, because it is the largest, the second largest economy in the world, and it is the only economy that is much more ready than the other ones to really switch into an energy transition. And I think, again, it's interesting to think about the opportunity to have closer Europe-Gulf cooperation and what stems from the energy agreements in terms of working together on connectivity. 1 minute, yes. Working together on connectivity of how to export and also working together on the security issues that surround having such a partnership. Because, of course, you know, maritime security, for example, in the Gulf becomes even more important from a European point of view, actually properly strategic, if the Europeans depend on this maritime trade for part of their energy security. So with all of these inputs, I'm going to thank you all, and I'll pass back the floor. Thanks.
Thank you, Cinzia. And the last of your comments, here is the same issue when it comes to interest. It's not only what is good for you, good for us, okay? When you need us to cut our oil, you ask us, well, this is for the climate change and you have to do so and so. Then when it comes for your interest that because there is no Russian oil or because of the inflation, whatever it is, please pump more oil, then our relation with the West becoming under pressure. So this is what we mentioned also in the previous session. Also, you have to consider the other side interest, okay? Because it's also good for us to have high-priced oil for our budget, for our treasury, and this is also solve our problem, right? Because also we have social constraints, and it might lead to political constraints. So also put yourself on the other party's shoes, and just where you stand, you can talk from where you stand. Thank you. Now, Dr. Fatima Al-Shamsi, please.
Thank you, Dr. Ibtisam, for inviting me to such a valuable symposium. I have a presentation in English, but I will speak in Arabic for those, let's make it easy. In my speech,
during my discussion, I would like to focus on some of the points. And I would like to start on the most important initiatives, Emirati initiatives in the field of non-traditional energy in all its kinds. And then we shall be talking in particular about the hydrogen as a source of energy, clean energy and renewable energy. And then I will be speaking in brief about the role of the regional role of the UAE in encouraging investment in clean energy. And then I will be talking about the Emirati-German partnership regarding energy. Of course, the UAE is considered one of the first countries in the region which has given importance to climate and has looked on achieving sustainability and preserving natural resources and fighting desertification and pollution. It is definitely the first country in the region which has put as objective net zero emissions to be achieved by 2050. And it has taken heed of investments and allocated almost $163 billion to be invested in renewable energy as part of its main objectives as well. In the 2021 strategy, it has made of the clean energy a main element in its strategy. And they were keen, definitely, on becoming a leader of green revolution. The UAE has taken interest, definitely, in development sustainability, and it has put a number of initiatives in the different fields. To take heed of clean energy and others through different strategies is not only focused on the federal government, but rather the local governments as well. It had interest in this regard and to achieve the importance of arriving to clean energy by 50%, or which represents 50% of the overall total energy in the country. And that electricity will be given through clean energy of almost 50% of it, and to commit to preserving
بالنسبة للطاقة غير التقليدية
green energy and others. As for non-conventional energy sources, the experience of the UAE was a pioneer, and Masdar City was the first attempt in the Middle East
فيما يتعلق
regarding
بالاستدامة
sustainability
خلال استخدام
through the use of modern techniques and to depend on
رئيسي على
mainly
السولار سيستم
on the solar system or clean energy, as said. And of course,
العديد من المبادرات
a number of initiatives which were taken into consideration in this regard, and which was the station of Noor Abu Dhabi, and alongside the support of Mohammed bin Rashid, which increased the renewable energy in the past few years, and it reached more than 2 gigawatts of
هذا المجال
potential in this field.
مشروع ضفرة
Al-Dafra project
أكبر
for solar energy. It was the biggest solar energy station in the region, and it has contributed
كل من
in having all of Abu Dhabi and Dubai to achieve
النسبة التي كانت
rate that it targeted,
بالنسبة
which was 7%, but Abu Dhabi is 7.7%, and Dubai, it reached 8.6%.
أيضا الطاقة النووية
We're talking here about the nuclear energy as well.
مجال هام بالنسبة
It was important for the UAE,
وهي الطاقة طبعا اللي تعتمد
which depends on a clean and safe technology to produce clean energy. Of course, Baraka project
النقطة الفارقة
was or made a huge difference in this field. It started in 2012, and now 96% completed in the completion of this project, and it is expected to attract a number of investments
في هذا الجانب
in this field.
انتقل في الحديث عن الهيدروجين لأن
We are talking here now about hydrogen. This kind of green energy
جانب مهم
is of vital importance,
وهو من الأهداف
and it is one of the main objectives of the UAE,
تهدف إلى
which aims at speeding up the transition from conventional natural gas to green hydrogen.
وطبعا تهدف الإمارات
Of course, the UAE aims at getting 25% of the global market share
المجال
in this field.
وأعتقد أن فرنسا
I think that
قررت أن
France as well has said that it will create a demand for clean hydrogen, which reaches 3 million tons per year by 2030.
ولذلك
Therefore,
الشركات الفرنسية
the French companies have invested in this field.
على سبيل المثال اللي خصصت
For instance, LG, which consecrated alongside
مؤسسة الإمارات
the Emirates Institution of Energy almost $5 billion
وكذلك
to achieve the same.
اتفاقية مع
There is an agreement as well with
Electricité de France
Electricité de France to invest in hydrogen as well.
طبعا ترتب على هذا مثل ما
Of course,
بين انه الامارات حققت
the UAE has achieved a lot in the field of
مصادر الطاقه بالذات ما يخص
energy resources, especially when it comes to electricity.
الشارت اللي قدامنا
So the chart that is ahead of us shows us where the UAE has reached in this field, where
حققت حاليا ما
at the moment it achieved what it targeted in this field.
الامارات ايضا
The UAE as well
دور
played a role, a positive role,
في طبعا
And it has committed to take heed of the other countries in this field, especially in the MENA region or the region of Middle East and North Africa. So it has taken heed to help in this regard and to provide support to guarantee a sustainable and safe environment. And it worked through the Arab Company for Petroleum Investments to provide the support, and it defined almost $500 million for the companies working in the field energy and renewable energy in the Middle East. And it has given to Siraj Power, which has given $50 million to support solar energy in the UAE and the region as a whole. The strategy of the UAE has played a very important role in attracting foreign investments. And this has increased in the field of renewable energy in the year 2019. It reached 1,223% compared to 2018. Of course, as is known, to invest in renewable energy demands investments, foreign investments, to attract foreign investments from abroad, because this kind of investments needs developed technology and to make this technology serve the interests of the countries, despite that corona pandemic has affected the foreign investments, and as a result, it has decreased by $73 billion in this phase. But there are serious efforts being exerted in this field, and that the UAE has taken several steps towards mitigating the risks of this pandemic, and it's still going forward steadily in this field. As to the Emirati-German energy partnership and the Emirati-German partnership, in this field in particular, it started in the year 2017 between the Fraunhofer Society and the UAE Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure. And its objectives were to provide the expertise in the field of sustainable energy and hydrogen technology, applicable hydrogen technology, and of course to give consultancy in this field. And what's most important is to provide the research infrastructure in this field. Of course, if we know that Germany plays a very important role in this field, and it has consecrated almost 700 million euros between 2006 to 2016 in common investments in the field of research in energy and sustainable energy. Of course, tomorrow we have spoken about this issue that now a number of projects, and we expect a number of projects in this regard. For projects of cooperation in the field of hydrogen have been agreed on with German companies, and cooperative projects, in particular in the field of research in this field, has been agreed on. And of course, this is a very important field for the UAE. At the moment, of course, there is Siemens Energy and Lufthansa as well. It has projects in the UAE. The UAE is providing good circumstances for the production of hydrogen. It's low cost, and it is expected that it would provide future supplies of energy in the form of hydrogen, environment-friendly hydrogen. Of course, a partnership in this regard will be of benefit to everyone, not only to Germany and the UAE, but rather to all of the world. I shall not be speaking further. I would like to say that the objectives of the UAE are sustainable development, preserving the environment, achieving balance, which is exemplary in economic and social development, and it is moving at a balanced pace towards sustainable development, clean environment, and perhaps close cooperation between the UAE and Germany can help in achieving sustainable goals for both countries in this field. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Dr. Fatima. I hope you did not lose your energy in this session of energy. Please, those whom they want to intervene, put your name this way, and I'll give you the floor. Okay. You want to talk, Mohammed? You want to talk? Okay. Please, Dr. Otto.
I have only a short question. If I hear that all, then it seems all to be on a good way. Are there any problems? Yeah?
Mohammed Baharun, then Tobias.
Thank you very much. I have 4 quick questions, 2 for each speaker. First speaker, Cinzia, the objective for transition of energy is quite clear from the point of view of the UAE, but it's one-dimensional mainly, which is the long-term energy ability. But for the EU, for instance, Germany and others, it has even more of that. They need to stop importing energy by using their own energy. And then there is the green agenda, of course. So it seems like there is far more need from the European side to transition. In your view, what are the incentives for other GCC members to start looking into transition of energy? The second question is about marine security, and you've mentioned this importance of marine security now being looked at. If energy has been fully transitioned and there is no oil, will there still be need for oil, for marine security, and to what extent? Dr. Fatima, you had a fantastic comparison between, what France is doing and what Germany is doing with the UAE. If you look at both of them, which one seems to be advancing more, and to what extent there is synergy between both of them? The other question is on the investment in technology for new energy. From the point of view of the UAE, should we be investing in research towards, let's say, hydrogen fuel cells, or should we be looking into something like carbon capture technology through nanotechnology that would give even more life to oil and gas? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mohammed. Tobias.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the excellent interventions and inputs. Well, I would like to directly also react to what Mr. Wishoy has just said, because I do see that it all looks very promising on the paper, and it also sounds very promising, but I do see that there are some open questions, and I really doubt that whether they are resolvable by technology alone, especially in terms of the limited time we have and the great ambitions, especially when it comes to green hydrogen. So just giving you some examples here. To produce green hydrogen, we need a lot of water supply, and we need new forms of water supply. And so far, there are not really public discussions on how we can solve this problem and where do we produce those kind of water. I mean, when we do this with a desalination, then we have additional problems with the brine and the chemicals that are running to the sea. So, well, this is one thing. So, and therefore, I definitely agree with Cinzia that we need to have a comprehensive understanding, and this is why we always talk about water, energy, and health nexus, or water, energy, food nexus, because we can't see those things encapsulated from each other. We need water to produce energy and vice versa. So therefore, we need a more comprehensive strategy. And I would like to have more or a better or a more advanced discussion on the water scarcity problem, especially when it comes to green hydrogen that is presented as the new buzzword and the new technology for solving all our problems. I doubt it so far. And the other point is also that producing hydrogen can also produce methane that is more dangerous and more damaging to the ecosystem, to the air pollution than CO2. So there are also unresolved issues when it comes to hydrogen. So I think we need a more critical discussion on those parts as well. And this not only relates to the UAE, but also for Germany, that is really pressuring those demands. So we do not have a solution for this as well. And the other point is that I really think that the UAE is in a very good situation and really ambitious to have this kind of regional leadership role. And I do appreciate all the steps that have been done. And I do see, and this really resonates a lot with what Sebastian has said, that there's a lot of efforts also here in supporting other countries in the region. And I think that when we are talking about environmental degradation, about climate change within the region, then we also have to say that there is a huge gap between different countries with different scope conditions. And we need to overcome those barriers. We need to overcome, okay, how can we support countries that are suffering, that are not only suffering from environment degradation, climate change, but also from conflicts, from fragile governance systems, and so on. So here, and I really do see that the UAE is doing a great job, and I would love to see more advancement, more cooperation, also assisting Germany in supporting the UAE in taking this approach. So, and to have a more public opinion about environmental insecurity, but also environmental justice within the region. So I think those are debates that haven't been probably discussed as well. I had a last point, but I will then return to it later. Thank you so much. No, I just forgot it, so I have to come back to you at a later point. No, that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Tobias. Okay. I cannot see your name, but
Nora Rathje from the Bianco Foundation, thank you. Just perhaps on that point, because I find that quite interesting that currently the discussion is more on climate change adaptation, as hydrogen is one of like the transition to clean energy. And what has been missing so far is the entire climate change adaptation in sense of how are countries in this region, how is the UAE adapting? And I really want to emphasize what Tobias just said regarding the huge divide in the region. There are countries, I mean, like the UAE or Saudi Arabia, that are able to, even shoot airplanes into the sky to artificially create rain, and then there are others that are not even able to, currently, provide food security in the basic sense. And this will all, so the divide that climate change is having on the region will, I think, have major impacts also in terms of the stability of the region in the long run. And building on what Tobias said, I think there's a lot of also convening potential on this issue. And I think the UAE has a great and unique position to really play a major role here in supporting other and weaker states, and thereby also using this avenue as a potential trust-building measure. And I think there are a lot of co-benefits that can be created for, let's say, peace building and trust building in the long run that shouldn't be forgotten. So I just wanted to put that also onto the discussion.
Thank you. This is confirmed. It's not about that you are big or rich or you're having oil, not having oil, okay? That you have a leadership whom they are thinking about the future, okay? So you look to our neighbor this side and see what kind of model, and they have demonstration, protesting regarding the food, regarding the pollution, regarding, so it's not about how you use your resources. This is the question, and UAE started so long. Masdar, when we created Masdar, many of those neighbors, not neighbors, were laughing. Well, how an oil producer country creating such that what you call it clean, and you're thinking about clean energy. Okay, Bianco, Cinzia.
Thank you. Okay. Just quickly, of course, I mean, there are some technical issues that need more scientific research, and everybody acknowledges that. At the same time, we're dealing in the real world, so we have to think about what's the alternative. And with specific reference to water desalination, for example, the sea levels are rising so fast in the GCC countries that the GCC leaderships are already thinking about doubling the level of the water that they desalinate purely to prevent the flooding of some of those capital cities that are on the sea here in the GCC. So with sea level rising, you know, they would desalinate at double the amount regardless of whether they would use that water for green hydrogen or not. And of course, I mean, that's the input at the policy level is and will remain how to deal with all of the potential side effects in a sustainable way, which also includes how to deal with brine. Then the questions, Mohammed made two very important points. So green hydrogen, the EU will import 10 million tons, and most of it, because by 2030 it's too early to have pipelines, will go on tankers. So it will go as green ammonia on tankers, therefore it will only increase to the, and it will remain, some percentage of this will remain traveling by sea, so maritime security will greatly increase the importance. Whereas the incentives for other GCC countries to transition, that's a very good question, because sadly only 3 countries are actually ready to be serious interlocutors: the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and a little bit behind Oman. The other 3 are not. In the case of Kuwait, for example, they're really, really far from that situation. And I think it will become a question from a climate point of view. There are some of those, you know, called negative incentives that, and you're familiar, I'm sure, with the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, CBAM. They will not be parked away just because there is an energy security momentary crisis. They will still, these and other disincentives or negative incentives will remain to try and phase, first of all, push production of fossil fuels to carbon capture, and also phase out and encourage producers to embrace, you know, the future of energy, basically. And we're talking, when we talk about 10 million tons by 2030, we're talking at a minimum of $500 billion. That's the kind of, you know, sort of opportunity that it's still at the startup phase, so it can only potentially grow. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Fatima.
Thank you for this valuable intervention. And I agree with you that investment in this regard, in the hydrogen and in non-conventional source of energy is not an easy one. It's require a lot of research, it require a lot of studies in this regard, it require a lot of things that has to be to pave the road for such an investment. And I think with the collaboration and coordination between those countries who has, for example, the required technology and those who are investing in research and development, these things could be, pave the road for such investment and reduce the negative impact of such investment. The other question related to Dr. Mohammed Baharoun, who's more, supporter like France or Germany. I think both countries are doing great in this regard, and every country is doing part of this. And the UAE, I think, needs collaboration at all levels from different countries, and I think, widen the opportunity is very important. So I think there are always room for all countries to be invited and to take part in this very important programs that will guarantee the sustainability and moving to non-conventional source of energy. What is the other point? I still think that comprehensive studies and comprehensive strategy is required in this regard. And I think, again, I would say research and development is very important. Innovation in this regard is very important. And I think European countries always on the top range on this regard. Thank you.
Thank you both, Dr. Fatima and Dr. Cinzia, for this rich presentation. Now we will move to the next session.